when you sit there wrapped in a blanket because the heating bill's too high. Think about folks in the Middle Ages who had no heating at all. No insulation, no radiators, no windows that sealed properly. Most of them didn't just freeze and complain, they figured something out. They went underground, literally. And not just to hide, but to survive in ways we're only now starting to understand. See, most people imagine peasants living above ground in tiny wooden huts with straw roofs, which they did, sure, but that's only part of the story. Archaeologists have uncovered something way more complex. Whole underground shelters built with thought and skill, not just as temporary hideouts but as long-term survival spots. These places could hold families for weeks, sometimes months. Think about that. Not just hiding from cold, but from enemies, fires, and even hunger. They didn't stumble into this idea by accident. Medieval winters were brutal. Wine would freeze in cups. Wind cut through houses like knives. The average house was more like a collection of sticks pretending to be a wall, with fires that heated only the person standing closest. That's where the underground part comes in. People learned that just a few feet beneath the surface, the earth stays around 50 ff, no matter what season it is. That's not warm, but it's not frozen misery either. Families who lived in colder regions, say up north in Scandinavia, figured this out fast. They started digging deeper, sometimes 8 feet down or more. They didn't have weather apps or thermometers, but they knew from experience that the deeper they went, the safer and warmer it felt. Over time, they built more than just holes in the ground. They built systems with angled entrances to block wind, chambers that trapped warmth, and layouts that managed airflow. Some of these shelters were more complex than you'd expect. There were different rooms, connecting tunnels, even sections designed just for storage or sleeping. And these weren't slapped together randomly. Builders figured out how to manage temperature and airflow using nothing but what they saw and learned over generations. No textbooks, just observation and survival instinct. It wasn't just about staying warm either. Medieval life wasn't exactly peaceful. Raiders, bandits, rival armies, all of them roamed the countryside regularly, often burning homes and looting villages. If a family saw danger coming, they needed a place to disappear quickly. And these underground spaces offered just that. Entrances were hidden under hay piles or disguised as normal parts of the landscape. Once inside, a family could stay safe and silent until the danger passed. And fires were a nightmare. Towns burned down all the time. No fire department, open flames everywhere, and houses packed together like kindling. When fire hit, it moved fast. Underground shelters weren't just for enemy attacks. They also protected people from the smoke and flames. Smart builders made sure these shelters had multiple exits, so no one got trapped. Some even built tunnels that connected to wells, forests, or neighboring houses. If you had to run, you had options. Keeping these shelters ready was a job in itself. Families didn't just dig a hole and forget it. They checked vents, cleared debris, and made sure supplies were stocked. You didn't want to realize your only escape hatch was blocked when arrows started flying or smoke filled the air. In coastal towns, people built shelters close to the water to deal with Viking raids. In mountain areas, families had to worry about landslides as much as invaders. Depending on where you lived, your dugout had to meet different needs. Inside these shelters, people didn't just wait out the chaos, they lived. Archaeologists have found scratches on walls from people marking the days. Food was stored with care, everything was rationed. Waste systems, though basic, were thought through. Sanitation mattered. Nobody wanted to get sick while stuck underground for weeks. The smartest shelters were invisible from above. Entrances blended into the landscape. Once inside, spaces were tight but functional. Families had enough room to sleep, store food, and sit out whatever danger they faced. Some even had secret rooms hidden behind false walls, a hiding place inside a hiding place. Food storage was one of the biggest reasons people used these underground spaces. These folks didn't have supermarkets or fridges. What they had was the earth, and it worked better than you'd think. The steady underground temperature turned dugouts into natural refrigerators. Grains like wheat and barley were stored in barrels sealed with clay or fat to keep bugs out and moisture away. Root vegetables were packed in sand pits to stay fresh. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. Think of it like medieval meal prep. And meat, salted, dried, and hung from beams to keep it cool and mold-free. Fish, pork, sausages, all preserved the old-school way. These methods worked so well that some families stored enough food for 6 months or more. That's not just surviving, that's planning ahead. Even drinks had a spot underground. Water wasn't always safe, so most people drank weak ale, even kids. Wine barrels were kept in the coolest corners, which turned into early versions of wine cellars. Families also kept honey, their version of sugar, spices and herbs in well-marked containers. These shelters weren't just pantries, they were lifelines packed and organized down to the smallest jar. People even tracked what they had with tally marks or notches on walls. Some built little drainage systems using logs or carved stone channels to keep everything dry. A flooded cellar meant spoiled food or starvation, and building these spaces, it took serious skill, especially when resources were limited. If you didn't live near stone, you made do with what was around: dirt, straw, clay, fallen trees. People layered different types of soil to strengthen walls. Wood scraps and bent branches were turned into support beams. Straw wasn't just filler, it acted like reinforcement, like medieval rebar. They used techniques like weaving branches into frames and covering them in clay to create stronger walls. Nothing went to waste. Dried grass, animal hair, even old broken pottery, all got used if it could help keep the shelter stable and dry. Builders in wetter areas added more drainage. In the north, people added extra insulation layers. Some even reused old Roman bricks or roof tiles. They weren't aiming for pretty, they were aiming for survival. And they pulled it off. But all the right materials wouldn't matter if you didn't have tools. And medieval tools were, well, basic. Most digging was done with spades, flat bits of iron stuck to wood. No fancy grips, no shock absorption, just raw heavy work. Wooden shovels were lighter but wore out fast. Picks were used to break up tough soil or clay. Using one for hours, that was your gym membership and winter prep in one. Tool quality depended a lot on your local blacksmith. Some were geniuses, others, not so much. Still, with these simple tools, people carved out niches, benches, sleeping areas, even primitive drainage, all by hand. Think about that next time your Wi-Fi goes out and it feels like the end of the world. Even with good tools and smart building techniques, none of it mattered if you picked the wrong spot to dig. That alone could turn your cozy shelter into a swampy nightmare. Medieval families weren't just digging wherever they felt like. They paid close attention to the land. They knew which hills stayed dry, which valleys turned into ponds, and how water moved through their region during every season. Hillsides were ideal. Build into the side of one, and you didn't just get a sturdy back wall, you got natural drainage. Water moved downhill, not into your shelter. Plus, you only had to dig 3 sides instead of 4. Work smarter, not harder. Flat land was riskier. Build too close to a stream during dry months, and spring rains could drown you out. People learned these lessons the hard way, and that knowledge got passed down. The soil mattered too. Clay held up well, but got slick and heavy when wet. Sand drained great, but didn't hold its shape. The best builders knew to look for the right mix. Firm enough to stay up, loose enough to breathe. They figured this out by watching nature. If trees grew well, but the grass never dried out, the water table was probably too high. That ground got ruled out fast. Wind direction also played a role. You didn't want to build your entrance facing the same direction cold winter winds came from. Even underground, a bad draft could make life miserable. Smart builders positioned doors and vents to keep airflow manageable. Some even used small barriers or angled doorways to stop wind from racing through. Dugouts weren't random. They were clustered in places where all these conditions lined up just right. Over time, communities figured out which parts of the landscape worked and which didn't. Families that built in safe spots survived. Families that guessed wrong either moved or didn't make it. You can still see patterns in the archaeological sites. Little clusters of underground homes where the earth and weather played nice. And once a family picked the right spot, the real challenge began. Turning dirt and sticks into a space you could actually live in. These weren't just emergency bunkers. They became proper homes. No one wanted to sit underground for weeks surrounded by mud. People made these places feel as normal as they could, starting with decoration. Walls weren't left plain if you had time. Families smeared them with natural clay paints. Reds and browns were common because those pigments were easiest to find. Some even used chalky whites or blacks to add detail. It made the space feel warmer literally and emotionally. Red ochre especially shows up in digs, probably because it reminded people of heat and safety. And then there was carving. With a small knife or sharp stone, families scratched symbols, shapes, and sometimes even faces into their walls. Some drew animals or trees, a reminder of what waited above. Crosses and religious symbols were everywhere. When life was hard and danger constant, a little extra spiritual help couldn't hurt. Some carvings were personal, family signs, handprints, or tick marks counting days. Kids would scratch doodles. Parents might mark off seasons or prayer times. You can still see some of these carvings today, etched deep into shelter walls. The really ambitious added 3D details, raised designs made by building up clay into patterns or shapes. It wasn't fancy art, but it was something to look at. Even underground, people wanted to create. Some spaces were more decorated than others, almost like a medieval version of keeping up with the neighbors. If one family carved vines and leaves into their walls, the next might add stars and suns. But decorating was only part of making life bearable in a tight underground space. Organization was everything. These dugouts were small. Think a one-room cabin, but lower, narrower, and darker. Families had to eat, sleep, store supplies, and sometimes hide for days in that one space. They made it work. Benches carved out of the dirt doubled as beds. At night, people laid out straw or furs on top. During the day, those same benches became seats for meals or resting. There was no room for extra furniture. Every inch counted. Niches cut into the walls held tools, pots, and food jars. Everything had its place. And if it didn't, you'd trip over it in the dark. Cooking happened near the entrance where ventilation was better. Fires had to be kept small or smoke would choke the space. Smoke holes or vents were dug at angles to let the air flow up without letting cold air drop down. It was tricky and families had to adjust constantly. You didn't want to be the one who smoked everyone out while making soup. Lighting was minimal, tallow candles, little oil lamps, maybe a burning stick if you were lucky. It wasn't bright, but people adjusted. Kids learned to play quietly with carved wooden toys or pebbles. Adults worked mending, weaving, sorting supplies, all in the half-light. Archaeologists have found tools, small games, and even carved animals left behind in these spaces. Privacy was rare, but people still tried. Hanging cloth or fur between sleeping areas gave a sense of personal space. Families often designated corners for parents, kids, and guests. During long stays underground, those tiny boundaries helped everyone stay sane. The longer people stayed in these dugouts, the more they adapted. If a winter was especially harsh or danger dragged on, families started expanding. They dug side rooms, storage alcoves, and extra exits. Some shelters grew into small underground complexes, multiple rooms connected by low tunnels. They weren't castles, but they were safer and warmer than anything above ground. And once life calmed down, not everyone rushed back upstairs. Some families chose to keep using their dugouts as part of daily life, storage in the summer, sleeping space in winter. Others rebuilt above ground but kept their underground homes ready just in case. What's really fascinating is how some of these shelters lasted for generations. People repaired them, passed them down, and taught their kids how to dig and maintain them. Skills like how to find dry soil, shape an arch to stop collapses, or set up a vent without freezing the room, all passed along by word of mouth. Even today, some rural parts of Europe still show signs of this way of life. Hidden rooms under old farmhouses, cellar systems connected by narrow tunnels, leftovers from a time when the smartest move wasn't to build up, but to dig down. And that's the part that sticks. These people didn't just survive, they problem solved, they observed, they experimented. With zero modern tools, no formal training, and not much room for error. They figured out how to beat both the cold and the chaos by using the ground beneath their feet. Not with fancy machines or science degrees, but with grit, patience, and generations of shared knowledge. So next time your feet are cold on a tile floor or you grumble about heating costs, remember a time when people figured out how to stay warm by building downward. They used dirt as insulation, carved out food storage with nothing but spades and sweat, and made homes underground that lasted centuries. They were digging for warmth, yes, but also digging into something deeper, survival built on observation, cooperation, and just enough hope to make it through the winter.